Hey, I'm Bill White, the executive director of Small Church Big Table, and welcome. It is great to have you on this call. And for those of you who are listening later, great to have you. We are here with Mark Oestreicher, who is the guru over at the Youth Cartel, who does coaching, and he also works for 10 by 10. And we are so grateful to have him. Small Church Big Table, we are a coaching organization that works with church leaders who are trying to have conversations about LGBTQ questions, but they don't know where to go. Primarily, we work in evangelical spaces where there is theological diversity. There's diversity amongst the congregation, amongst the staff, amongst the board, where people are trying to follow Jesus as best they can and they see the scripture differently. And so we create space for these churches to go on a journey and ask questions. We don't have an agenda, whether it's to be traditional, to be affirming, to be somewhere in between. Rather, we try to think about what are the best practices that help Christian leaders love queer folks who are in their congregation and get to as much clarity as they can within their mission and within their context. And churches come out lots of different places, and we feel great about all that because they're trying to love Jesus better and follow him with folks who are, have traditionally had a really hard time in the church. So on this call, we're going to hear from Marko. I'm going to ask him a bunch of questions, and then we'll unmute after a little bit, and you all can jump in and ask Marko some questions yourselves. But yeah, welcome. We are glad to have you. Um, Marko, tell us a little bit about your history with youth ministry. You do have a little bit of gray in your beard. I'm wondering, have you been around this for a while?
Yeah, a little while. I think it's 44 years, maybe coming up on 45 years. So yeah, it's been a while for sure. I worked as a junior high pastor in several churches. I grew up in Detroit and worked at a church, and it did an internship there. And home first job was at a church in Chicago in Wheaton, and then Omaha, Nebraska, and then Pasadena, California. Um, in many of those places, I was junior high pastor and student ministries or something else also. And then back in 1998, I got asked to come on staff at Youth Specialties and moved down here to San Diego for that purpose. And was with YS for 11 years. And then they got sold and I lost my job, a very normal thing to happen, even though it felt like death. Um, and Brett knows that. Brett knows what that's like.
Wow.
And started the Youth Cartel and have been doing that ever since. That the whole time I've been in San Diego, these last 28 years, I've been a volunteer in the youth ministry at my church, same church the whole time. And I'm currently a sixth grade boys small group leader. I'll be with them tonight. So
Wow.
that really keeps me grounded. I don't want to be one of those national youth ministry leaders who talks about my experience from 1986. Want to have a group of students who are not impressed by me and only care about my consistency. Yeah.
That is fantastic. You're in the game. And so
Yeah.
have you literally, so you're not on staff at your church, you're just a volunteer.
I'm not. I'm ordained by my church.
Oh,
And I preach about 4 times a year there and do a bunch of other stuff, coach some of the staff, involved in a lot of hiring and stuff. I should say right out of the gate here that my church that I love is a conservative evangelical church, which
right.
is we're not going to spend a lot of time talking theology overtly today, but I do think it's helpful to know I am no longer somebody who you would consider a conservative evangelical. I consider myself an evangelical in the original sense of what that meant. I believe in the authority of Scripture and the deity of Christ and the importance of the resurrection, all those kinds of grounding pieces. But my church has historically had a lot of diversity in it, which is one of the things I always loved about it.
Mm.
But it is an overtly, I'll say it's an overtly non-affirming space. And my church does not do well with this topic. And maybe it's a time Bill and I were having a little interaction prior to the call, and I introduced this term that I recently came across
Yes.
reading a friend's dissertation, not something I do very often. He coined that. He said that most evangelicals over the last 50 years have either fallen into American or evangelical Americanism or apolitical evangelicalism. And so many evangelical or conservative churches, even a lot of moderate churches, say we just don't talk about that stuff. And my church squarely fits in that space,
Right. Right.
which kind of worked 10, 15 years ago. And we might talk later about what are some changes I've seen. And I'm just seeing that less and less are we allowed to get away with that. Yeah.
It is true. It
Yeah.
is in today's climate, it is much harder. Uh, do you find kids that your sixth graders are asking you questions now that are trying to pin you like, well, hey, how about you? Or and where they're not content for you to be kind of apolitical.
I don't think my sixth graders are trying to pin me down. I would
Okay.
think that maybe by eighth grade, certainly in high school, they might do that more. Um, I think my guys, being still fairly concrete thinkers right now, they
Yeah.
assume that there's only one right answer. So there's not a question of which side do you fall on so much
Yeah.
as,
Yeah.
yeah. So, and they tend to embody the beliefs that they have at home, their parents'
Sure.
beliefs, which of
Yep.
course starts to get much more differentiated over the span of the teenage years.
Yeah. Yeah. So coming along, do you remember when LGBTQ questions began to be a hot topic? And what would you say have been a couple of the pitfalls you yourself have fallen into?
Yeah, great question. Well, the honest answer is that I suppose it was a hot topic or a topic that needed to be talked about long before I cared about it.
Mhm.
And I, on many what have become hot button issues, I kind of went along with the flow of the church that I worked at, and was not thinking critically beyond that. So, an example would be I worked in complementarian churches for the most part, and I just never gave it all that much thought. And so, and the same would have been true with this. I thought I had a gracious, generous perspective toward LGBTQ people in that I didn't see the proclivity as sin, and thought it's just like any other. It's just like any other sin. We're all broken people, and we need to be welcoming of everybody. So I was already in a welcoming space. One might say, yeah.
Right.
Um,
Right. Yeah.
and I didn't get confronted with my own lack of belief, my own apolitical evangelicalism, until my oldest kid came out to us at 17 years old. They're
Mhm.
32 now, so that's my journey was primarily in relationship with my oldest kid who was born Liesel, born female, and then in 2 years' time came out or four different ways. First, it was I'm bi, then it's I'm gay. Oh, I'm also trans. No, I'm non-binary. And today, Riley changed their name and had top surgery. Would say that they are queer. They don't like all the other terms. But I would say today they're bisexual and non-binary. Um,
Right.
so yeah, and I spent. I mean, I don't know if I'd call it a pitfall, but I'll acknowledge that I spent a good 4 years being a closeted dad of a queer kid. I was
Mhm.
terrified. I didn't know who to talk to, and didn't know what I believed. Was not really focused on figuring out theological questions or biblical interpretation questions at that point. Was just trying to figure out how do I love my kid? How do I defend my kid? we can maybe come back to this, but my experience with my church was not great in that era. And that's what lit a fire under me in my belly to help youth workers more in this area. Yeah.
So,
So
I
I
mean,
saw a lot of pitfalls. I don't know that they were my pitfalls. I saw my church's
sure.
pitfalls very, very clearly.
So
Yeah.
you still have relationship with Riley?
Oh, yeah. In fact, Riley moved back into our home a year and a half ago. We have a very good relationship. Yeah.
Ah, that is amazing.
Yeah.
Man, do you have a sense of like what your church did well and what you wish they would have done differently when Riley came? I mean,
For
that could
sure.
be the whole
Yeah.
webinar here, but um, what would you say to that? We'll start with a couple of things that your church did well.
I don't know if I can come up with a couple things they did well when it
Oh,
comes to this. There's
shoot.
so much good about my church. So
Yeah, right.
I would have left long ago if right. My will say my entire family left. I'm the only one who still goes to my church.
Oh, wow.
And Riley would say today that they're not a Christian because of how the church treated them. So what the only thing maybe they did well was that they did stay in relationship, like the youth ministry where Riley was so active did stay in relationship with Riley. Riley was a student leader, was played in the worship band and also led another student leader team, was there every week. And they didn't say, well, now that you've come out, you can't continue in those roles. So I would say that's the one thing they did well. I have a list of the things that they didn't do well.
Oh man,
So
you want to mention a few of them?
Yeah, 4 of them. First, I discovered pretty quickly that I did not want or need judgment on me or my child, and it felt like just a barrage of judgment, particularly from the youth pastor.
What did judgment look like? Like how did
judgment looked like this topic being in every single conversation. It felt like constantly, particularly to Riley, constantly clarifying kind of we want you here, but you need to know where we stand. And it was repetitive. That happened all the time. And Riley would even say, and I felt this as a dad because I was pretty close to the youth, I was a volunteer in the youth ministry, right? Was that it was this constant concern on their part, ignoring all the other good stuff that was happening. Even if we say it's problematic, we're whole people and we're more than this, right? I'm more than just the dad of a queer kid. And my kid is more than just a queer person, right? And so it just became the focus on everything. And with always that qualification to belonging, right? So that was the first thing. There was a lot of, what do you think went wrong or what caused this? And I found those kind of questions to be significantly unhelpful.
Did you have those questions going through your own mind, and therefore they were kind of feeding into some of your own insecurity, or is it just people trying to? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, there's no question that my wife and I early on wondered, what role did we play in this? But yeah, constantly being asked the question. At least it felt like it was received as a statement of judgment. There must be something you did wrong. Kind of felt like one of Job's friends, giving me bad advice. Second thing I'll say is that I wanted compassion, but not pity, because pity very quickly in something like this feels like judgment. And I found myself instantly distancing myself from people who expressed pity or revealed it in their face or body language. So I wanted people to ask how I was doing. I wanted them to acknowledge that parenting can be tough. Wanted them to ask how they could help. But I really struggled when people said, I'm so sorry for you, or with sad faces, because it sounds like an inference that my kid doesn't meet your approval. And I thought, maybe as a parent, I need the same thing that my kid needs, and that's to know that you still want my child here, even if they don't fit your idea of the ideal youth ministry kid.
Mhm,
Yeah.
mhm.
So
Yeah.
that's the second thing. Third, I really want you to celebrate all that's good and beautiful and true about my child and my relationship with my child. I need you to name those things that are good and beautiful and true, and I don't need you to quote Bible verses to me, which is such a common approach
Yeah.
for youth workers. And then finally, I need my church to be uncomfortable and go overboard in communicating we love you and we want you here to my kid without qualifications.
Mhm.
And none of those happened.
Right.
Yeah.
Just to come
It's
up and say, "Hey, we're so glad you're here. God, great to see you, Riley. How's your day going? Like,
yeah,
you belong here, man."
right. Yeah.
Uh, all right. Well,
Instead, it was you belong here, but we just need to remind you.
that we have a moral stance, and
Yeah.
yeah, that. But my brother came out to me in 1990, and when he did, he came out to me first before the family, and he said, which was honoring. He said, "Hey, um, do you think mom and dad know? Like, they have no idea." And then he says, "What do you think?" Right, the moment of truth. What do you think, Bill? And I said, "Well, I want to let you know I love you, but." And then, but I've always thought it was wrong. I don't even remember exactly what I said, but that but is just so
Yeah.
in that first conversation, it's
I try
just
to help.
so.
I try
Ooh,
to help youth workers, particularly those more on the conservative side, um, to decouple the but.
yeah, right. Yeah, it's
should I
decoupling
tra-
the bud. I
I
mean,
should trademark
yeah,
that
decouple
phrase.
your bud.
Um, it's totally legit to have those conversations with a kid who is wrestling with these questions and to say, we want you to understand where our church lands on these topics. And I think that's totally legit.
Yes,
I just don't want it to be constantly coupled with the statements of belonging, right?
yeah,
The we love you and we want you
right,
here need to stand on their own.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
And the conversation about biblical understanding or our church's theology is a separate conversation.
That's fantastic. Yeah, I love
Yeah.
that. So you've been in youth ministry for 44 years. What has changed from your perspective in the last 10 years? What new challenges are youth workers facing now in 2026?
Yeah.
What's top of mind?
Two things are top of mind. One is I already mentioned earlier, and that's that I think it's getting harder and harder to uh, be in that undefined space where where you don't have answers or you're not
Mhm.
willing to share them. Um, I mean, when I did seminars on this topic 8 years ago, I would say it's completely possible to be a very welcoming, inclusive church without being affirming. And I think it's harder to be in that kind of a middle space these days. It's certainly harder to not be forthright, let's say. Um, and there's a concept in educational theory called the null curriculum, NULL. And the null curriculum is the stuff that you don't talk about. So it's that apolitical kind of, right,
Mhm.
or agnostic even
Mhm.
approach to hot button issues. And the idea behind null curriculum is that it teaches just as much or more than our formal and informal curriculum. And so by never addressing a topic, then you end up teaching all kinds of stuff that you probably didn't intend to teach.
Mhm.
Um, and that's becoming more and more difficult. I have a
Yeah.
real compassion for churches who are trying to find a third way or remain evangelical but become more inclusive. It's a hard place to be in because more and more, and I'll say this: adults in America today are so tribal, right? We all
Hmm.
know that,
Hmm.
and kind of insist that you declare a side, one side or the other. And that's not necessarily as true with teenagers.
Hmm.
And so authenticity and humility can lead a little more easily in
Right.
conversations with teenagers. The
Hey,
other
hey,
big,
Marco, let me
yeah,
jump in on that. So, we do a lot of work with churches where there is theological diversity on their staff. So some of the staff are affirming, some of the staff are traditional, some of the staff don't know. Yeah, these are pastors, or their boards or their congregations. And we do find that been most helpful has not been saying, okay, we need to decide we're either over here or over here, but rather to say, we need to decide how we're going to talk to each other
right,
and demonstrate curiosity. And we're going to surface conflict. We're going to recognize it's already there. We're not going to pretend. We're going to actually talk about LGBT questions in the church. And we're going to move to the point where we have a statement that, I mean, these churches are going to have to make a statement. And those statements vary across the spectrum, but they're all way more gracious than they would have been otherwise because leadership is actually talking about stuff.
yeah,
And in fact, we're working with a church right now who um, the youth pastor for 5 years asked the elders, tell me what our church wants me to tell the youth, because it was the null curriculum. They wouldn't say anything for five
yeah.
years. Finally, they said, okay, let's talk about it. There's theological diversity on the elder team, on the pastoral team. We've been working with them, and they brought a 17-year-old onto their discernment team. They brought a parent who volunteers in youth ministry. They brought the youth pastor, a 17-year-old, and a couple of elders, and one other, like a local university staff worker, to be on this team to discern. It was fantastic. They did such a great job. So, I mean, and the church has done a really great job being diverse, but really open and authentic.
That's great. I think it's extremely rare. I'd love to see that happen more. I think what is way more common is churches, at least leadership of churches, know what they believe. And again, wherever they are and they believe, they know what they believe, but they think that it makes more sense to not be very forthright about that because they don't want to scare people away. Right. And that, again, my church that I
Mhm.
love would be in that
Yep.
space. They've said historically, they talk about how we're a center set church, not a bounded set church. So we don't have to
Mhm.
define the entire belief set. We define the things that are most important, and this would not
Right.
be one of the most important things. And therefore, it's not a it's not a requirement for we don't have membership, but it's not
Right.
like that kind of thing. And they believe that it's better to not address it unless then he might say that's a living room conversation, not a pulpit conversation. But never gets preached on. I want to connect this to
Yeah.
Kathy's question here in the chat. And I would suggest, Kathy, it totally works in practice. If all I'm really implying by that, I'm not at all suggesting that you don't have conversations with people about what our church believes. I'm just saying, like, I had a kid come out, one of my sixth grade boys came out to me as non-binary a few weeks ago in our small group, in front of the whole group, by the way. It was a courageous move on his part. And he shared in the prayer request time that he'd been being bullied at school because he likes girls and boys, is how he said it. And he kind of made a comment about, I don't know why that should be a big deal. Now, wherever I'm at on my theology or my church is on there, I should have a conversation with him about what we believe. I just, in that first moment, I want to decouple that and I want to unreservedly say, Luke, we love you. Thanks for your courage. We want you here. And I'm going to follow up with him and have probably lots of conversations about it. And many of them will be filled with biblical interpretation and our church's belief set. I would also say that I think that it's really helpful to have a humility about our beliefs. I realize I have a little bit of a luxury in that I'm not on staff at my church. So when I talk about my ministry context, I have a bit more freedom because of that. But I don't want to be out of alignment with my church in how I do ministry with my boys. So it's not like I'm there to secretly convert kids to my political or religious set of beliefs, right? That's what I mean by decoupling, is just don't make it the same conversation.
Right. Do you want to say the second thing that has changed?
By the way, the
in
only
the last
time
10
you
years?
would maybe, I will say the second thing, the only time you maybe would couple it would be if you're having the theological conversation, couple it with the qualification, but we still love you and want you here, right?
There you go. There you go.
Yeah.
Good. I like that. Well
The
done.
second thing that I've seen as a shift is that when I started talking about this in front of groups of youth workers, and we had a Q&A time, all the questions in those early days, 9 out of the 10 questions were about LGBT. They were about same-sex attraction, being gay. And now 90% of the questions about transgender and non-binary. And so we've clearly seen a pretty significant shift over the last decade in the United States and in our churches, frankly, where, and really just in adolescence, the quantity of kids who are wondering if they're trans has suddenly far outpaced the number of kids who are wondering if they're gay. Yeah. So that's a huge shift. And it's one that so many youth workers feel ill-equipped to respond to.
So when a kid comes out as particularly trans, or maybe they're saying, gosh, I'm starting to explore, I feel maybe more like a boy than a girl, or you've mentioned something about the first 4 responses that every youth worker needs to have memorized.
Yeah.
What are those? Can you unpack that for us?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Yeah, I encourage people. It's not only the youth pastor who needs to have these memorized. It's like we need all of our volunteers to have this locked in.
Right.
I mean, this is one of the things maybe you could say where like little traps I fell into early on is if I did have a kid talk to me about this stuff and I wasn't ready with how I would respond, I'd either be like, cool, just affirming, right? And not clear at all. Or, people tend to either be non-committal and just affirm, or they tend to jump in with the theological arguments, right? And so, yeah, I think we need to have these 4 things memorized. First conversation, kid comes out or asks a question. Often they don't come out as much as that they have a question that they're wondering about. So in order, they are, thank you for your courage in talking to me. It's just obvious risk for a kid when they come out to a youth leader, volunteer or paid. So thanks for your courage, right? Acknowledge that. Secondly,
I say the same thing to parents when, as I coach parents, like, hey, the first thing you say to your kid when they come out, thank you. Wow, that's so courageous of you.
Thanking them for their courage is not a statement of agreement, right? It's just about building them up, right? And saying, yes, I want to be a safe place for you to talk to me about things like this. The second thing is God loves you. Many kids, not all of them, but many kids who are wondering about or have already decided that I'm gay or trans or whatever variation of that, they're wondering also, does this mean that God no longer loves me? And listen, this would be true for a kid in a super progressive, affirming church too, because there's so many messages in our culture that they've picked up along the way that the church will not be okay with this. And I'm not saying that, I'm not making a statement about whether God approves of this or not. I'm just saying God loves you. Let's make sure that's clear. We love you. That's number 3. It's pretty rare that I would say use first person singular on that. It would have to be a kid that I had a particular relationship with that wouldn't come off as creepy, especially as an old white guy. But I think you can say we, and that implies our ministry. We love you, and I'm part of that
Mm,
too. So
mm,
thank you for your courage. God loves you. We love you. We want you here.
mm,
And so those four things. And really, anytime I have a first conversation with a kid about these topics, I lead with those four, and then I ask about three additional questions
mm,
that are only for my understanding, and desire to have that be the totality of the first conversation. So those questions would just be, how long have you known, or how long have you been wondering? Because how I respond to a kid who says, I think I might be non-binary because no girls will ever give me any attention, so maybe I am a girl, or no, maybe I'm gay because no, that's a very different uh, response than on my part from a kid who says, I've known my entire life, right? So how long have you known, or have you been wondering? Who else knows, and do your parents know? And if they don't, would you like me to help you talk to them? Would you
mm,
like me to
mm,
be in the room with you? And then, do I have your permission to bring this up again with you? They're
mm.
going to say yes. That allows me to then be in a place in some subsequent conversations where I can have a cup of coffee and sit down and talk about, I want you to understand what our church believes on this. There are churches that believe lots of different things. Even in my more conservative context at my church, I always want the guys to understand there are people who love Jesus and believe the Bible is authoritative who have different beliefs about this. And I'm not saying they're all right. I'm just saying we've done our best at this church to come to an understanding of what we believe, but just realize it's not the only belief out there. Right.
Right, right,
So
right.
those are the first four statements, and then a couple follow-up questions. And then I usually kind of set a reminder in my calendar to have a follow-up one-on-one conversation with the kid.
That's fantastic, Marko. So practical, so useful. One last question from me, and then we'll try to get to some of the questions from the people put in the registrations and people have in the chat. But um, you were on a webinar about a year ago, and you made a strong plea for people to be cautious about confusing their beliefs with truth. Can you remind us
Yeah.
what you're thinking about that?
Yeah, I remember that moment because somebody in a webinar just like this asked a question, but what do we do when their behavior is not aligned with truth? And in the moment, my response was, let me just say, before I answer that question, let me say that we have to be cautious about confusing our beliefs with truth, because our beliefs work out your beliefs in fear and trembling. Come on, I want you to continue to work out what you believe, and I'd love it to be orthodox and formed in light of Scripture, which I believe is God's primary revelation does. So, yay for that. I'm just saying, hold it with, like I said a few minutes ago, hold it with some humility. I used to believe things that I was pretty confident about that I no longer believe. There are things I'm sure there are things that I believe today that I will discover are not sufficient in the years to come. I had a friend years ago say to me that he hopes that God's Spirit will continue to reveal to him which of his beliefs are not good enough
Mhm.
so that he can do the work of replacing them. So I'm just saying,
Mhm.
let's have that kind of sense of humility, and it's really an honesty uh, about how we bring our own enculturation and our own um, grooming. I don't mean that in a creepy way.
Mhm.
We've been the beliefs that I have been formed in community with the people that I do life with, right? Not in some kind of void where they remain a pure, unadulterated truth. Does that
Mhm.
make sense?
No, that's super good. I appreciate. Yeah, thank you for that.
Yeah.
If folks want to drop questions in the chat, feel free. We'll give some priority to those. And let me just read off a couple of things uh, from people's registrations. So I'm a practicing Catholic of an adult trans child. I'd like to learn how to be better prepared to have discussions with family members who no longer talk to us because of this new reality in our family. So,
Oh,
what do you say to a family member who's like, they're starting to cut me off because of my
yeah,
trans kid?
that's so hard.
Uh,
I'll be honest. I don't have some easy answer that's going to fix that. We're pretty afraid of that in our own family story. Um,
mm,
my parents and sisters and my wife's parents and sisters are both evangelical Christian. My wife's are were they're passed away now, were fundy independent fundamental Baptist. So
wow.
we ended up telling my family at one point, and kind of expected that it would go well, and it did. With my in-laws, we waited a whole nother year until it became untenable to not tell them.
Right.
Like, it was clear that some of the cousins were friends with Riley online and were seeing this, right? So it felt dishonest. So in conversation with Riley, we decided once when we were in Detroit to have that family conversation, and we were bracing for it to go really badly. But it just became so clear they just didn't want to talk about it. So it was like my wife did the talking. Riley was there also and explained all this stuff. And it was around the time that Riley was already using the new name, Riley, and
Mm.
asking for people to use they, them, their pronouns, and finished that. And then Jeannie said to them all, okay, I'm going to stop talking. We'd really be willing to answer any question you might have. And my mother-in-law pushed her chair back, stood up and said, nope, it's time to get dinner ready. That was it. That
Oh,
was the end.
okay.
And they did, to their credit, they continued to be very loving to Riley.
Yeah.
And they did use Riley's name. They could never quite get there with the pronouns.
Yep. Yep.
But they did put the effort in immediately to use the preferred name. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. What do you do? How do you support?
I didn't really answer the question. I just gave
No,
my
you
story.
didn't.
So
But I mean, it's hard. You told a story, and the story captured like it's difficult, and it depends on what the family is
yeah,
and
whoever asked
how
that
open.
question, what I would recommend is that you read a couple of books that would help you understand approaches for those kinds of conversations. And what I mean by that is, don't read books by way out there liberal progressives that would be in such a different universe from where your family is. Instead, read something like, in your situation, I'd read Preston Sprinkle's book, Embodied. Preston is conservative, ultimately. And there's many things in the book that I don't agree with, but for a conservative, it gives lots of helpful incremental steps. What are the parts that are okay for me to not worry about, and what remains that maybe I should be concerned about? So something like that would not only help you, but would help you in conversation with people, because they're often just freaked out, right? If I could be
Yeah.
compassionate toward your family, even though that behavior is disgusting in many ways, it would be, the compassionate response would be, what are they afraid of, and how can I help address their fear?
Right. So as a volunteer, as a youth worker,
Mm-hmm.
um, a kid comes out. How do you support that kid if they are really struggling at home? If there's a lot of animosity at home, if they're scared, or a sibling is, or their dad is really saying harsh things and telling them they have to do reparative therapy or something like that. How do you support the kid?
Yeah. Well, I suppose there's a lot of context to that question. And one of those contextual elements is, as an employee of a church, what are you allowed to say? Right.
Mm.
Um, and, if you're in a progressive church, which I know some on the screen who are, then it's probably a different ongoing conversation with that kid than if you're in a church where doing other than saying anything much more than saying we love you and we want you here and let's stay in dialogue and I want to be a safe place for you to unload this kind of stuff. Anything more than that could get you fired. And so there is that contextual tension on that. I mean, I would prioritize that as the main thing for a kid in that kind of situation is to be a constant of love and acceptance to them,
Right.
um,
Would you
rather than
offer
trying.
to talk? Would you offer to talk to their parents?
Yeah, I would,
Hmm.
but I
Hmm.
wouldn't do it without the kid's request
Right.
or
Sure. Of
permission.
course.
Same, by the way, important note. Same on coming out. I'm terrified when I see so often in youth worker Facebook groups somebody say, what should I do? And all the people who respond, you need to tell their parents.
Mhm.
Man, the time we tell the parents is if they're in danger, right? Um, and I would not rush to tell the parents. Now, I would be encouraging a kid to tell the parents and offering to be a part of that.
Mhm. Mhm.
But yeah, I don't think it's our place to out kids.
Great. Super helpful.
Here's another factor involved in that. This kid, this sixth grade boy who came out to me as non-binary, 2 weeks ago, um, is he going to end up trans or non-binary? It's unlikely. It's unlikely. It is part. It's like kids, especially in their young and middle teen years, they're on an exploration of their identity that includes all kinds of things. And now our culture has made it clear you have an additional set of options. And so it's normal that it would be one of the things they're wondering, right?
Yep.
And for
Yep.
this kid, if he thinks a boy is cute, that doesn't mean that he's going to end up gay or trans or anything at all. I've regularly had conversations with kids who I'm thinking of a kid named Chris who a number of small groups ago came out to me as an eighth grader saying that he was gay. And then I bumped into him. I hadn't seen him for years, and I bumped into him again. He was about 20 years old, and he was picking up his younger sister from youth group. And I said, "Hey, Chris, you came out to us as gay when you were in eighth grade. What's the story since then?" And he is, "Oh, yeah, I wasn't." So I mean, it's just it's just really normal. So I think we want to really hold that loosely. This is one of the reasons why if a kid says to me, "I've always known this. I've known it since I was, 3 years old," that's a really different story. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. Mark Yarhouse has some longitudinal studies where something on the order of 20% of kids who are exploring gender identity end up identifying as trans 10 years later, 15 years later. So it's definitely a minority, but it's real.
Yeah. I think that the percentage will continue to shrink because so many
Right,
more kids are
right,
asking the question.
right, right.
Yeah.
Exactly. So good. Let's, you want to jump in at some of the questions in the chat? How about this? Without being too intrusive, I am curious why the rest of your family left your church and you remained.
Yeah, no,
Again,
that's
share
not.
that if you want, but don't
Oh
don't feel
yeah,
like you have
no,
to.
I'm an open book. So it wasn't. It was this for my two kids. So Riley graduated from stayed in it, graduated from high school, but then very quickly moved
Yeah,
away from an active faith, and we had lots of conversations about that. Max, my now 28-year-old son, so he's 4 years younger than Riley. Um, he stayed active in the youth group too, and went off to college. And when I asked him pretty recently why you don't go to church, it really was about how Riley was treated. Um, so my wife, it was for totally different reasons. Actually, my wife may have already left our church by that point. Our church it's rock and roll,
yeah,
uh, contemporary style church. I really resonate with the worship and the preaching at my church, and my wife really didn't. She wanted something more contemplative. So
yeah,
we
yeah,
support each other's spiritual journeys, but
yeah,
that's why. Yeah.
yeah. Hey, there's a question also in the chat about um, youth workers being careful about offering outside resources to youth without parental approval. Do you want to comment on that? So a kid comes out to you, the home situation is messy because of this, that, and the other. Kid says, "Hey, what resources can you share with me about my journey?" What do you do?
Thanks, Teresa. It's lovely to see you. It's been a long time. Um, Boy, it's so situational, that question, right? I mean, I recommend books or websites or apps to kids all the time without parental approval. I'm sure you do
Mm,
too, right? Um, and the reality is, today's young Zs and Gen Alphas are digital natives. They will find stuff. I'd rather them find the things that I think will be helpful than them discover things that they think will be helpful and are actually harmful.
mm.
So I probably wouldn't put a lot of weight on that. Now, if I'm giving them a book that I think might stir things up, or a resource that I think might stir things up, then yes, I want to probably be more intentional. Some of that would depend on whether I have a relationship with the parents, then I'm probably going to be in communication with them about that kind of thing anyhow.
Yep.
Yeah.
Super helpful. Hey, I'm gonna just place a pause here. I'm gonna respond to a couple of the more theological questions just very
Great.
briefly. You take
Great.
your breath. Other folks, feel free to drop stuff in the chat. So these are questions that came in the registrations. There are a couple about third way churches. How do you handle specific issues of polity, disagreement around LGBT questions? Um, and can middle positions be justified if you're, in various forms? Those are going to be beyond the scope of this. We actually have a couple of blogs on our website at smallchurchbigtable.com about third way theology, about the steps that people go when recognizing that theological diversity is an issue around LGBTQ questions. So there's also a couple of questions about hermeneutics. What style of hermeneutics people use in their interpretation of scripture to become affirming or to be traditional. And there's some questions about perspectives on Bible references to same-sex relations. Next month, we're actually doing actually, I think it's in May, May 20th, we're doing a deep dive on Romans 1 with a graduate of Talbot Seminary who has a advanced degree in hermeneutics, which is how you interpret scripture. And so we'll just be looking at an evangelical hermeneutic around Romans 1. So again, those are some things that are beyond the scope of this, but there are resources out there, and we love to participate with that. So,
While we're
Marko,
given resources, can I name 4 books?
please.
It's a lot, but different books for different purposes. Um, the Youth Cartel published a book a number of years ago called Four Views on Pastoring LGBTQ Teenagers.
Highly recommend. I've read it.
Yeah,
It's great.
it's a it's I think it's we don't publish books anymore, but I think it's still available on Amazon. I also think YM 360, Youth Ministry 360, picked up a lot of our titles, so it might be on their website, but you can still find it. It is not pushing one perspective. That's why it's 4 views, right? Then I would say for your own understanding or for recommending to parents, if you're in a more conservative setting, then I would recommend those two particular Press and Sprinkle books. If it's about same-sex attraction, then People to Be Loved is the name of the book. If it's about transgender questions, it's Embodied, right? So I guess I'm going to give you 5 books because those were a set of 2. And again, he does have a conservative evangelical biblical understanding, but desires to be inclusive and in relationship with people.
Hey, to update the People to Be Loved, which is a little bit one of his older books. His book on is same-sex attraction, 21 biblical questions about same-sex relationships,
Great.
which just came
Yeah.
out last year. His introductory chapter is fantastic on the right questions and the right
Great.
attitudes. I recommend it whether you're progressive or conservative. Doesn't matter. It's fantastic. Great resource.
Then a simple little, very thin, short book from a more progressive perspective. It's a theological or a biblical interpretation book, Those 7 References. And I would recommend that book, particularly that you should read it if you're conservative, to understand what a biblical interpretation of the 7 references that in English use the word homosexual or homosexuality what's another way of interpreting those? So recommend those. And then the fourth one is if you want something more autobiographical, and I've often given this book to parents whose kid is questioning their sexuality, is a little bit older now, Justin Lee's autobiography called Torn. And I think it's subtitled like Wrestling. I don't remember the subtitle. It doesn't matter. But it's his own story as a Bible-believing Christian who always knew he was gay. How does he reconcile that? And it's got some theological or biblical exploration in it also.
So good. So good. Thank you for those. Big picture question. Well, actually, why don't we stop recording? Let's unmute. People have been doing great.